Great. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first training session for Norwood Town Meeting. We're really excited to have you here. My name is Christian Brandt. I work for MAPC, and I'm joined by my colleague, Rachel Marks. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Moderator to welcome you all to today.
Thank you, Christian. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I want to thank everybody. The number is higher than we had expected, at least the count that I saw yesterday. So thanks to everybody for signing up and taking the time to try to learn how to do this. It's a new thing for us. It's certainly new for me. It's a little more involved than Zoom meetings and that some of us have been involved in over the last several months. But the people from MAPC have been wonderful. We've been dealing with them over the past few weeks with several meetings and practice sessions and so forth. It's somewhat sad that we have to meet this way and instead of in person, but that's what we're dealing with these times. So everybody, again, thanks very much, and please listen carefully. It is a lot we have to learn, but I really appreciate, and I think the town appreciates your involvement. I'll be on the meetings as much as I can be, and I'm trying to learn this as well as everybody else. Christian is a great teacher. He's going to do a great job for us today. So thank you. Christian, it's all yours.
Great, thanks, David. So without further ado, let's dive in. So as I was saying, I think most of you heard this, but this we are doing the first training for Norwood's virtual town meeting. So what we're going to do today is introduce you all to Zoom webinar, which is what we are currently using, and the different functions that you will have access to. So we're going to learn how to mute and unmute. We're going to learn how to raise hands and lower hands. We're going to learn how to use the Q&A box and how to use the chat. And we are also going to learn how to respond to polls. So at the end of this, we will be able to respond to questions that you might have about the Zoom platform and how that might work with town meeting. And then we'll set some expectations for a virtual town meeting. So this presentation will be shared, so you don't need to worry about writing down every detail. We'll make sure that this presentation is available to you. And then also Norwood Community Media is sharing this on their cable channel, so you'll be able to rewatch it there as well. So without further ado, let's go on. So today's agenda, we're going to meet from 5 to 6:30. So like I said, we're going to review the Zoom webinar. We're going to go over how to register and the security that Zoom has so that town meeting is a secure event. Talk about how you can access some technology support, and then how to be recognized to speak during town meeting, how to vote, how to raise a point of order if that is something that you need to do, and then go over some helpful tips and additional resources. So during this meeting, if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to post that in the chat or the Q&A. Again, we will go over how to do that. So if you have a question and you don't know for sure how to use the chat or where the Q&A is, we'll talk about that. So just hang tight and hold your questions until then. All right. So normally, we would be doing town meeting in a big room like a gymnasium or an amphitheater or something like that. Town meeting members would typically be sitting in the audience, and they would be watching the people running town meeting on the stage. So right now you are in the attendee role, so think about yourself as being in a virtual audience. The panelists, which is what I am right now, are the people who are on the stage. So in true fashion, true to this sort of like in-person setup, right now the people who are panelists are the people who speak on stage, and if attendees have a question, they would sort of like line up at the virtual microphone and ask their question that way. So really, the Zoom webinar is sort of mimicking the way that you would experience a town meeting in a large room. It just so happens that we're all joining from our own computers. So hopefully that helps you sort of understand the difference between what you are right now as an attendee versus what the panelists are, which is me, Rachel, David, and a couple of other people. So the Zoom basics that you need to know about are these functions. So the first one is the chat, which is only going to be available to us during the training. So we won't have chat during town meeting. So if you aren't sure exactly how to use that, you won't need to worry about that for the actual day of town meeting. But then the other basic Zoom function is unmuting and muting yourself, and that is a function that you don't have on your screen right now because most attendees do not actually have access to their audio, but we'll go over that in a little bit. And I just see that David has corrected me that you don't line up at a microphone, but people raise their hands while in their seats. So the same rule still applies, really. As members of the audience and attendees, you'll sort of raise your virtual hand, and that is how you'll be able to that's how Zoom mimics that. So we'll get into how to do that in a second. And then next to the mute button, you should see a little arrow that looks sort of like a carrot. That is the button that you can use to test your audio. And then there's also a sort of hand cartoon, hand symbol, and that's how you would raise your hand. And then, of course, the text bubbles, the symbols that look like two little text bubbles is the Q&A. So there's a couple of things that you need to be most aware of while you are in Zoom meeting. So on the screen, you will see a screenshot of basically what you're looking at right now. So the first thing that you need to know is that in the bottom corner, left corner of your screen, you should see something that says audio settings. Audio settings, it says audio settings right now because as an attendee, you don't have access to the audio function yet. So we'll go into when you would get access to that. But in the audio settings in this button, you can use this to adjust your audio. If you had the microphone symbol, which we'll get into, you would be able to use that to mute and unmute. In the middle of your screen, at the bottom, you should see the chat, the raised hand, and the Q&A. Those are where those buttons are located. In the top right corner, in your Zoom window, are a couple of buttons that are useful to know. They are minimize, maximize, and close window in that order from left to right. You won't necessarily need to use these in order to participate in the Zoom, but we'll get into a moment, an instance in which you might want to know how to minimize your window in a little bit. So in addition to that, at the top of the screen, you should see a green bar that says my name, so Christian Brandt, MAPC. You're viewing Christian Brandt, MAPC's screen. So this is how you know who's sharing the screen, and right now that's me, so it should say my name. Right next to it, there is a box that says view options. You actually right now can't change your view, so you don't need to worry about that. So then lastly, in the bottom right corner is a red button that says leave. This is what you would click if you need to leave the meeting for whatever reason. I would not recommend that you click that because you will literally leave the meeting, but it is just useful to know that that is there. And then finally, in the left corner of or left side of your screen, you should see a list of all the other participants today, and that shows who the other attendees are. So you will see a similar list at town meeting, and that is where you will be able to see who has raised their hand and who the other participants are. So if you are joining us from your smartphone, this is what it will look like. It's more or less the same. So the raised hand, chat, and Q&A are located at the bottom, but in fact, the leave meeting button is at the top. And right now, all you can see is the microphone with the little audio sound, like the sound waves next to it. That is what you would use to adjust your audio. If you are joining us from a tablet, your screen will actually look like this. So it's a slightly different. All of the Zoom buttons are actually located at the top. And as you can see, the leave meeting button is now on the left side of the screen. So first things first, we're going to learn how to use the chat. So down at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a button that represents a little text bubble that says chat underneath it. So if everyone clicks that, what it will do is it will open up a box on the left or on the right side of your screen, excuse me. And at the bottom of that, you will see sort of like an email looking like setup where it says to, and you can select who you are sending the message to. So if you click the little arrow there, you can change it to just panelists, or you can send it to all panelists and attendees. And then you can text, you can add your comment in the text at the bottom. So I see that Joe has actually already shared a message in the chat of hello. So if you, once you write your text and then you click the send button, it will show up in the chat like such. So as you can see, we right now have 3 messages in the chat. One is from me, one is from the moderator, and one is from Joe. If you're on your phone, this is what it will look like. It'll sort of the same situation, but instead of popping up in a separate window, it will just pop up over the shared screen. So before we move on, I would love for everyone who's with us today to practice sending something in the chat. So if you could just say hello, share your name, or any other sort of greeting that you want to say to everybody else, that would be great. I see the chats coming in. Awesome. All right. Yes, Happy New Year, everybody. And good to see you. Welcome, welcome. So it looks like everybody's sort of getting a good handle on the chat, which is great. And sort of as a reminder, you won't have this chat during town meeting. And one of the reasons for that is that it can get hard for the people running the meeting to sort of manage the chat and make sure that we're responding to everybody's concerns. And so we'll get into the question and answer box, which is a much more organized way of doing that. But for now, since there are only 28 attendees and 5 panelists, the chat is actually a great place to go if you have questions or if you have a comment. So head there, or you can use the Q&A, which we'll get into in a second. All right. So this is how you test your audio. I was able to do some audio testing with people before the meeting began. And so we're gonna do some audio testing now so that you can see what that is like. So down at the bottom, you should see, like I was saying earlier, something that says audio testing, audio settings, excuse me, with a little arrow next to it. So this is what you will see as an attendee sort of just regularly. If you click on the arrow, which you don't need to do this right now, but if you click on the arrow next to audio settings, you will be open up a sort of settings box where you will be able to make sure that your Zoom has connected to the right microphone and speaker, and you'll be able to make sure that you can hear that your microphone is picking up your audio and that you can also hear the audio coming from the speaker, which I'm assuming that at this point you are able to hear me, hopefully. So if you click on the very bottom bar on the box that says audio settings, it will open up a large box like this. So again, you don't need to do this right now, but it is useful for you to know, because if you are experiencing some audio problems during the day of town meeting, this is really the place to go in order to help solve that problem. So you will be able to test your speaker and test your microphone here. So if you want to test your speaker and microphone, you can also do that from the box that pops up. And so if you test your speaker, you can see a white box pops up in the bottom left that says, do you hear a ringtone? And what that should do is it should actually just play a sort of simple ringtone for you. And you'll be able to tell that the microphone is playing it by seeing the blue line at the bottom next to output level go up and down. Once you, sorry, excuse me, I went forward too quickly. If you click yes, do you hear a ringtone, you will be brought to the next page, which is testing your microphone. So this is where you would speak, And if it replays what you're saying, you can click yes. You can also tell that it's picking up your audio by seeing the blue bar next to input level move up and down. So if it's moving up and down, that means that it's collecting your audio, and that means it will be able to hear you. So during town meeting, if you are if you have been recognized to speak for whatever reason, whether it's to ask a question or make a motion or something like that, what will happen is that the tech staff will give you the ability to speak, and then you will see something pop up on your screen that looks like this, and it will say the host would like you to unmute. You have the option of clicking unmute or stay muted. If you click stay muted, you will of course stay muted. If you click unmute, you will unmute. You should also be able to see once you have been given the ability to speak, that the box that says audio settings, so down in this left corner, you see that it says audio settings. On this next screen, it changes to a symbol of a microphone with a slash through it, and underneath it, it says unmute. So I am going to go through the list of participants and give us all the ability to speak. So that way we can say hello and talk to each other. And then once we have tested that out, we will keep going for the rest of the presentation. So I'm going to start down the list. So I'm going to give everyone the ability to talk. And this might be a little slow, so I apologize, but we want to make sure that everybody has access to the audio for today, and that we are able to test.
Christian, I'm going from the bottom, just so you know.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So a lot of you should have the ability to speak right now. So if you want to, if sort of one by one, just unmute yourself and say hello to your fellow town meeting members, that'd be great.
It's Jean Chambers. Hello.
Hello, Jean. Welcome.
Hey there.
Oh, great. I can hear Thomas and John.
Yep.
Hey, hello. Hey, hello.
Hey, Christian. David.
Come on in.
Everybody. It does seem like we're getting It does seem like we're getting some feedback. So I'm going
We definitely are.
mute. I think that was actually John Collins who we were getting feedback from. So John, I can connect with you later in the meeting just to try and figure out what's happening there. But now you all have the ability to speak. So you should see in the bottom left corner of your screen a microphone that says, with a line through it that says unmute. So while we're going through this how to unmute and mute section, I'm gonna keep you with the ability to speak so that you can see what the microphone situation actually looks like. So when the microphone does not have the red line through it, and the text underneath says mute, you are actually unmuted. When the microphone has the red line through it and the text underneath says unmute, you are actually muted. So that can be a little bit confusing, and so we'll get to the clarify the difference in just a second. So what you need to know is that the text under the symbol is what will happen when you press it. So it's sort of, think about it as an instruction. So if you have the microphone with the red line, it means that you're muted, and the text underneath says unmute, because if you press the button or click the button, that is what will happen. If you do not have the red line through your microphone and the text underneath says mute, that means that you are actually unmuted and everybody can hear what you're saying. And again, if you press the button, you will mute yourself. So that is what the text underneath means. And then if, like when you joined, if it just says audio settings, then it means that you don't have access to speaking. And we'll get into when you would want to get access versus when you wouldn't. So one important thing to know is that the Zoom host, which is right now is me, we actually can't unmute you ourselves. So in order for you to unmute, what will happen is that we will ask you to unmute. And like I was showing earlier, you will get a box that pops up on your screen that says the host would like you to unmute. So this is a great thing in some ways because it means that we can't just accidentally unmute somebody and then all of a sudden hear everything that they're saying. But it does give an extra step to you in order for you to ask a question or something like that during town meeting. So that's just something to be aware of. And this is something that we can practice during the question and answer period at the end. So I'm going to move us on from the muting and unmuting. If you have a question about this, feel free to post it in the chat. So if you're joining us from the phone, this is what it will look like when the host asks you to unmute. And again, this is what it will look like if you are unmuted. So it's the same setup, and this is what it will look like if you are muted. So the symbols will be the same whether you're joining from your phone or something else. All right, so we sort of already practiced this. So I am going to, we can practice unmuting. Although if we get some feedback, I might actually just mute you myself so that we can keep going, but I will keep a mental note of what feedback problems we're experiencing. So I see that Michael Riley is already unmuted. I know that some of you have successfully unmuted previously, so if you have, you don't need to do this again. But I see John has unmuted, and I think I just muted you, John, because I think that our feedback is coming from you, which is no big problem. I will touch base with you towards the end of the meeting just so that we can figure out what is going on. But if you are listening to this on multiple devices, that could be the reason why we're experiencing some feedback, or it could be something else. So I see a bunch of us have unmuted, which is great. Which means that we should be able to hear you. So we can go through and test this out some later during the question and answer period. All right, so I'm gonna move us on. So this is an important part for us to discuss, and this is how to raise your hand. So during town meeting, you will want to raise your hand in some specific circumstances that we'll get into later. But like we were saying at the beginning, you should be able to see the raised hand button in the middle of your screen at the bottom. So it should look like this. So if you don't have a yellow hand, don't worry about it. Zoom has redesigned the way that this looks on multiple occasions. So you might have a different version of Zoom and your hand might actually just be gray. If that's the case, it's okay that it's not yellow. But as with muting, the text underneath will tell you what will happen if you click it. So this right now you can see on the screen that my hand is just yellow and underneath it says raised hand. That actually means that my hand is not raised. This, however, means that my hand is raised. So I clicked the box and it made a gray outline around the raised hand. And that indicates to me that my hand is raised. And then in addition, my hand, the text underneath it says lower hand. So that is, again, sort of the instructions for what will happen if you press the button. So this image on the screen right now means that your hand is raised. Your hand may look like this when it is raised. So when it's not raised, it might be gray. When it is raised, it might turn blue. It again sort of depends on the version of Zoom that you have. So the other thing to keep in mind is, so just in sort of bigger relief, The two pictures on the left is what your hand looks like when it's not raised. The two pictures on the right is what your hand looks like when it is raised. And as always, the text under the symbol tells you what will happen if you press it. So the next thing that you should know is that when you raise your hand, it will actually show up in the attendees box on the left side of your screen. So you can see that Carolyn has raised her hand. So everyone should be seeing the yellow hand next to her name. That means that she's raised her hand. So if you are confused about whether or not you've raised your hand, all you need to do is look in that box. And if there is a yellow hand next to your name, it means that you have raised it. So I can see that everyone is raising their hands. We have 9 raised hands. So that is sort of like one good way if you're looking at the button down in the middle of your screen at the bottom and you aren't sure whether or not your hand is raised, you can always look at the participant box on the left side of the screen, and if there is a hand next to your name, that means that your hand is raised. All right, so if you're on your phone, this is what the raised hand will look like. In some ways, this is kind of nice because it's actually a little bit bigger than on your computer screen. But again, because the hand is gray and underneath it says raise hand, it means that your hand is not raised. And on this screen, I have raised my hand. The hand is turned blue, and lower hand is the text underneath it. So that means that your hand is raised. So this is just a closer up look at what you will see in the participant box. My hand in this picture is blue. What you're seeing, the hands are yellow, and that is because between the time that I took this picture for the presentation and we're meeting today, Zoom has changed the way that it looks. So you might be seeing your hand as a blue hand on the screen. Because I'm sharing my screen, you will always see it as a yellow hand. So what I want for everybody to do now is for everyone to raise their hands so that we can just make sure that everybody knows how to do that. So raise your hand and keep them raised. Carolyn has asked in the chat, does the list show the hands in order of who raised their hands first? Yes, it does. So this is an important thing to keep in mind during town meeting, is that based on the list right now, Alan raised his hand first, Michael raised his hand second, John Collins raised his hand third, so forth and so forth. And Mr. Bergeron, I'm actually going to mute you at the moment so that we can keep the list working. So it looks like we have a few folks who still have not raised their hand. Unless you already have, and I might have just missed you. Hello. Donna, did you have a question?
Yes.
Yes. What is?
I can't find my name on the list to click it.
So what you you don't want to click on your name on the list. So right now you can see your name is up on the top of the screen. Where you would go to raise your hand is by looking at the bottom of your Zoom window. So I'm going to go back in the presentation.
Okay.
Just to show you what that looks like. So in the bottom of your screen in the center, like you can see on this shared screen right now, there will be an option, like a little drawing of a hand. And that is where you would go to. I see that you have raised your hand, so you have figured it out. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to, it looks like I think everybody has been able to raise their hand. So I'm going to move us on. So that's good. One thing that we will be doing at town meeting, which we'll go into a little bit later, is that the host will be able to lower all hands at once. So I'm going to lower all of the hands at once right now. So you don't have to lower your hand for yourself. And this will come into play when we're voting, which I will go into detail later. So I just lowered everybody's hand. And I'm just going to, there we go, perfect. So I'm gonna keep us going. But again, if you have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. So just to reiterate, Carolyn asked, does this list show the hands in order of who raised their hands first? It does. And so when you are looking at this list during town meeting, the people who are at the top of the list raise their hands first. And so it goes sort of in chronological order. All right. So how to raise your hand. We just covered all of this. So the Q&A. The Q&A is the other tool that we will be using during town meeting to communicate with each other. So like I was saying earlier, we actually won't be using the chat during town meeting. And part of that is because the chat isn't organized. It just shows chats like a text chain. So there's sort of like when a chat comes in, that's the order in which it comes. So the Q&A is useful because we can actually organize it and respond individually to each question that is posted. So the button for Q&A is located in the bottom center of your Zoom window, to the right of your raised hand, unless of course you're on a tablet, in which case it's at the top. So the Q&A, once you click that button, it will open up a box that says welcome to the Q&A. Questions you ask will show up here. Only the host and panelists will be able to see all the questions. So I'll go into detail in a little bit about what that means. And then at the bottom, there's a little box that you can use to type your question. And it should say, type your question here, ... So that is where you would go to type your question. So if you were to post a question in the Q&A, you would write the text of your question down in that box and click send. Then the question, once you have sent the question, it goes into the all questions tab of your Q&A box. And you will be able to see that. So you will be able to see the questions for everyone who has posted. I see that Joseph has asked, is send anonymously going to be enabled for town meeting? That will not be enabled for town meeting because we want to be able to make sure that we are responding to, that we know who's asking every question. So it's not going to be enabled for town meeting, but it is enabled right now, which actually I might just turn that off. So I just turned it off so that that way there's no confusion. So when you post a question in the Q&A, it shows up, you'll be able to view it under all questions, and then you'll be able to view your question under only the questions you have asked under my questions. So when you post in the Q&A, the town meeting host or any of the Zoom co-hosts will be able to respond to you directly. And you'll be able to see those responses. So this is really useful because in the chat, you can't respond directly to people. So sometimes chats get lost and we miss them. In the Q&A, that is not the case. So we'll be able to make sure that we can respond to everybody's posts in the Q&A. So you can see that Christian Brandt who was participating in the Zoom on this screenshot posted, point of order, what is the legal statute that enables town meeting to be held virtually? And then the Norwood town meeting host responded saying, thank you for your point of order. The moderator will address shortly. So this is just kind of like a basic example of what you would expect to see in the Q&A.
Christian.
Yes.
David here. I think we want to make clear to people what, let me get this back on, what we're using Q&A for. It's actually very limited.
Yes.
If somebody wants to speak or ask a question during debate on any of the matters that we're taking up, any of the articles or the motions under the articles, what you have to do is raise your hand as you would at the meeting. The Q&A is used for if there's a point of order, which is pretty rare in our practice. That has to do with somebody questioning the legality of what we're doing, or questioning whether somebody is has overstayed their time or something over on their time to speak. And is it also available, Christian, if somebody's having technical difficulties, or how are we going to handle that?
So I think this is sort of on a slide a little bit later, but we are not going to use the Q&A for technical issues. We will be using the community call center for that.
That's right. Okay, thanks for
So if someone does post in the Q&A with a technical issue, we'll just direct them to the community call center. So that way the Q&A is really just for points of order. So thank you for that. That's great to clarify, because we want to make sure that people are posting points of order that are sort of in accordance with what you normally do.
I think the reality will be that most town meeting members will have no reason to use Q&A.
Right. Correct.
And if they're asking questions about what we're debating, they'll be doing it by raising hands and being recognized by the moderator in the usual way.
Exactly. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So if you are on your phone, this is what it will look like when you when you open the Q&A. You'll be able to type your question out by the "I want to ask a question," and then if you post it, it will show up like this. So, like the moderator was saying, the use of the Q&A for points of order is very limited, so we don't expect that to be happening very frequently. But in the event that there is a legitimate point of order that you would like to make, this is how you would do it. So, for practice, what I would like for everybody to do is go to the Q&A and write test. I will try to respond to as many of them. Rachel and I will try to respond to as many of them as possible. We might not actually get to everybody, but I will be able to see how many people have posted in the Q&A. And that way we will be able to make sure that everyone knows how to do it. So as you are posting in the Q&A and Rachel is responding, you will notice that you'll start to see her responses listed underneath the questions. That is just a good indicator of whether or not we have seen your question. So one thing to note is that in the Q&A, there's a couple of different ways to respond to a question. One of those ways is by, we can say that we'll answer it live, and then in which case the Q&A will tell you that the so-and-so, whoever, like Christian Brandt will answer your question live. But what Rachel's doing right now is typing answers to questions. And that is how then you'll be able to see her response show up in your questions. So like I was saying earlier, in the Q&A, under all questions, you'll be able to see everyone's post. If you want to just sort of, if you are just really interested in knowing whether or not we've responded to your question specifically, you can go to the other tab next to all questions at the top and click My Questions, and that will just show you the questions that you have posted. So I see that we have a good amount of people who have posted. So if you haven't posted yet, please do so.
Christian, we actually have a question from Jerry here about what time the town meeting will start.
Great, good question, Jerry. So town meeting will start at 6:30, but I will be actually opening the webinar a little bit early in case you would like to join and just make sure that you are all set to go with your audio and all that. So what I will be doing is opening the webinar line at 6:15, and that will give you the opportunity to join a little bit early to make sure that your audio works and all that good stuff. So town meeting will officially get started at 6:30, but again, the webinar line will sort of be open a little bit earlier. And you can kind of think about that as showing up to the town meeting hall like 15 minutes early and sort of like lingering before the start of the meeting so that you can get all of your stuff in order and be ready to participate. Again, you will be getting an email from, we'll talk about this in a little bit as well, but the town will be communicating that information to you. The town clerk's office will be communicating that information to you, as well as the links to register for the actual day of town meeting. And so you'll get that information in an email, so keep your eyes peeled for that. But thank you for asking that question, and even better that it was in the Q&A. All right, so I'm gonna move us on because we are about 15 minutes until Q&A, so I wanna make sure that we've touched base on all the things that we need to. So we sort of discussed this already, so I'm just gonna go forward. So voting, this is important because obviously town meeting members vote at town meeting. So there are two methods for voting that we will be using. One is a Zoom poll, and that will be for final motions on articles. The other one is by raised hand, and that is for votes on amendments and non-final motions. So you can think about this in the same, like the raised hand vote is equivalent to when you would just raise your hand in town meeting to vote. So we're going to sort of practice that in just a second, but I want to show you what it looks like first. So I know that also that the text of this poll example that I'm showing isn't exactly the text that we'll be using at town meeting, but for all intents and purposes, it will sort of look very similar. So the poll, when a poll is launched, it will pop up on your screen, and it will say, and the text of the poll will be at the top, and then you'll have answer choices underneath that. And so in this example, the answers are yes and no. So what you would need to do is just click the circle next to yes or next to no, whichever you want. And then at the bottom, you'll see a button that shows up called submit. So that you will want to click that button, and that will send in your vote. It's important to note that at the top, there is an X button, and we recommend that you don't click the X button to get out of the poll. And the reason we recommend that is because sometimes when people click the X button, they don't see subsequent polls. We don't know that there's a good fix for this. So for the time being, for polls, our recommendation is that you always click submit and you try not to click the X if at all possible. So once the polls are done, the host will share the poll so that you will be able to see the results. And so that will look like this. All the people who have voted yes will be shown under yes, and everyone who voted no will be shown under no. In this example, 100% of the poll responses were yes. So again, make sure not to click the X to get out of the poll. Instead, go to the bottom of the poll box and click close. So this is what it will look like if you are joining from your iPhone or from your Android. The poll will actually pop up over the shared screen, and it will look like this. You'll be able to click yes or no, then you'll be able to click submit, and then you'll be able to click close in order to return to the main screen. I think, Carolyn, you just asked, would there be an option to abstain? I think that is a great question for the moderator, if you have insight onto that. Whether or not we will be doing yes, no, abstain, or just yes, abstain, or something similar. I think depends on what you normally do for town meeting.
We don't force people to vote. So if we have 200 people present and the vote is 150 to 25, that means 25 people chose not to vote. And I think what we talked about during our prior sessions, Christian, was we have a yes or no. And anybody who doesn't fit into one of those categories has abstained just by not voting. So if you abstain on one question, you're only abstaining on that question, not on any other question that comes along. Each one is taken separately. And we envision the need. We're limited to 25 polls. Yeah. For the meeting. And we don't expect we're going to need all of them, but a lot of what we do will be fairly routine, we think, and we'll use raising hands, which is, when we're meeting in person, we do it by a voice vote, and usually that is satisfactory for a lot of things. We can't do a voice vote when we're doing a virtual meeting, but we're doing a voice vote. The closest thing to it will be raising hands, and we'll get a count of the hands pretty quickly. Yeah. So, and I think there was another question that came up on that, and this is a technical one. If you just hit submit without choosing an option,
Yeah. So if you are choosing to abstain from voting on a poll, what you would want to do is actually just leave the poll untouched. The submit option only shows up once you have selected a choice. So just to go back onto the screen right now, the submit option hasn't turned blue, so you can't click it because you haven't selected a choice. And if you are choosing to abstain, you just leave it like this. If you have accidentally clicked yes or no, and then you realize, oh, I actually don't want to vote on this, just don't hit submit, and that will not submit your vote, and then you will have effectively abstained. Does that make sense? So if you want to abstain, just don't submit the vote, and that won't record your vote, and then that will be you abstaining. If you originally click yes and then on second thought you think actually I want to vote no, you can just change the answer before you hit submit. But once you hit submit, your answer is recorded, and you don't have the opportunity to change it. So hitting submit is a final vote for you. Does that answer your question, Carolyn?
Christian, how long do you typically see a vote held open to allow people to vote when we're doing polling?
I think in previous town meetings we've left it open for a minute to a minute and a half. We can close it early if it seems like over 90% of people have voted, and it's just the numbers haven't changed in a little bit. But we usually will sort of just let people know we're closing the poll in 30 seconds, in 15 seconds, so that way people will know that they need to submit their vote if they haven't already.
Yeah, and I think that's important that we make that announcement so that everybody knows that their time to vote will be coming to an end. There could be some close votes, and there are some votes where the quantum of vote required, will have to be reached for it to be effective.
Right. Okay, so moving on, we're going to practice voting. So I'm going to launch a poll, and it's just a test, and the only answers are yes or no. And the poll just asks you if you can see the poll. So you can respond no, and obviously if you respond no, I'll know that you have seen the poll. But if you respond yes, it doesn't really matter which response you pick, just so long as you're able to click an option and respond. But before I do that, I see that Joseph asked, some items require someone to second it. How will someone second a motion when audio is muted and chat disabled? That is a great question that we are actually going to get to a little bit later. So I'm gonna put that on our list to discuss in just a second. But fear not, we will touch base on that. Okay, so I'm gonna launch this poll. So everyone should see a box have popped up on their screen. I see that people have already started to vote. All right, so I see on my screen, I can see how many people have voted. It looks like 22 out of 28 people have voted. So now we're at 24 out of 28, so we're almost there. If you aren't seeing the poll pop up, one thing that you might need to do, which we can discuss later as well, is minimize your Zoom window, and you can do that again by clicking the sort of bar at the top. Everyone should be able to see the poll. So if you still aren't seeing the poll, if you want, you can either post in the chat that you haven't seen it, or if you want, you could raise your hand. All right, I see John is raising your hand, and I am going to unmute you, John, but I do know that the last time there was a lot of feedback, so we might not be able to talk that much. So I just asked you to unmute. Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
John,
if
you are talking, I can't actually hear you,
but I do
get an echo. So I'm going to mute you again, and I will connect with you at the end of this meeting, because we want to make sure that you're able to vote and that your audio is working for you. But I do see that now we're at 26 out of 28 people, so I am going to end the poll. And now I'm going to share the results. So this is what you will see on your screen when we have finished voting and you're seeing the results. An important thing to note is that the percentages that you are being given are actually just out of the people who voted, not out of the total people who are at the meeting. So you won't be seeing the results. The results do not include people who have abstained by not voting. So 85% of the people who voted said yes, 15% of the people who voted said no. I see, Donna, you have your hand raised, so I'm going to ask you to unmute. All right, go ahead.
Are all the votes going to be in percentages, or are they going to be an actual count?
So that is a great question. I'm actually going to drag my poll screen onto the shared screen. So now you should be able to see the numbers in parentheses next to the percentage. The poll that you get shown will only show the percentage. If we need to show the actual numbers, we can do it. We can do this too. But it can get a little bit confusing because then your poll box is sort of over the screen where you'll see my poll box. And so that can get a little bit confusing, but we can also announce what the numbers are as well when we're announcing the result of the vote. All right, so I am going to stop sharing my results. So you should see the poll disappear from your screen.
Christian,
yes.
There's one thing too. Attendees should realize that panelists and hosts do not vote.
Excellent.
Cannot vote in the poll.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why Zoom webinar is actually really great for town meeting, because when we launch polls, only people who are attendees can vote. So what that means is that only town meeting members will be able to vote, because only town meeting members will be attendees. So this adds a little bit of an extra layer of security to the process. So in some instances, there are actually people who will be in the panelist role, like committee or board chairs, who will need to also vote because they are also town meeting members. And in those instances, those individuals will be moved into the attendee role so that they can vote on that particular article. So that way, we'll be able to make sure that everyone who's a town meeting member is able to vote, and that people who are not town meeting members will not be able to vote.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to move us on. So this is sort of, I'm going to do a really quick recap. I want to make sure that we cover the things that we just talked about again, but this time in the context of how they work with town meeting. So we've sort of talked about some of this already. So this should not be new information to you. So I'm going to keep us going. So this is what we're going to do between now and, well, not 7:30 to 8:30. I forgot to change that on the slide. We are not going to be meeting until 8:30. Don't worry. We'll be done in about a half hour. So again, town meeting members will be attendees on the Zoom, and that means that they're basically sort of audience members sitting in the audience. The moderator, any of the panel, any of the sort of article proponents, or people who need to give a presentation, or the general manager, those people will be panelists, which means that they're sitting on the stage, and they'll be able to interact with each other and show their video, but attendees will only be able to interact once they raise their hand. So again, sort of quick overview of navigating during the meeting. In the bottom left, you'll have your audio settings, which is also where your mute will show up if you have been given the ability to speak. In the middle is where the raised hand and Q&A function is. In the top right corner is the minimize, maximize, closed window buttons. In the middle of the screen, you will see a green bar that just tells you who's sharing their screen. In the bottom, in the bottom right corner is the leave the meeting button. So don't click that unless you really want to. And then the panelist window on the left side of the screen shows who is attending the meeting as an attendee and who's raised their hand. So I see that Sarah has asked, what about members of the public who would like to speak on an article? How will they be able to join? I will get to that in just a second because that is a great question. And there is a process that will be shared, that the town will share with town meeting members about how the public can go about doing this. So this is what it will look like if you join from your tablet or from your smartphone, excuse me. This is what it looks like when you join from your tablet. So again, testing your audio, those settings are in the bottom left corner of your screen. And right now, everyone has the ability to speak. So you don't have the audio setting. All you have is the microphone. So once you click the arrow, that will open up the audio settings box, which looks like this. And you can use that to see what your audio settings are and test your speaker and microphone. So I know I'm going through this a little bit quickly, but we already went over this earlier, and also you'll be able to get this presentation afterwards. So if you still have some lingering questions, we can talk about that in just a second. So testing your microphone. This is what most of you will see right now. You'll see in the bottom left corner, there's a microphone with the red slash through it, and it says unmute. If you have raised your hand to be recognized during town meeting, then the host will ask you, the Zoom host will ask you to unmute, and you will get a box that shows up that looks like this. And to unmute yourself, all you would need to do is click unmute. That will fundamentally about try to undermine. I see that that we do have a post in the Q&A from Paula. So is Zoom town meeting available on Norwood cable for residents? Yes, I was going to mention that at the same time I answered Sarah's question, but Norwood Community Media will be streaming town meeting on the government channel. So where you would normally go to watch some of the town public hearings will be the place where the members of the public can go to watch town meeting live. All right. So again, more about muting and unmuting. When the line is through your microphone and the text underneath says unmute, you are actually muted. When there is no line and the text underneath says mute, you are unmuted. So just remember to keep in mind that the text underneath the symbol always says what will happen if you press it. So it's sort of like an instruction in that way. All right. So here's what the steps that you'll need to take before town meeting starts to make sure that you can get to town meeting and participate fully. So one is that you will want to complete the registration form. So you'll need to register in order to get the access information. All of you will have done that in order to get to this meeting. So that should not be a new thing that you will have to experience. So you'll get a link to the town meeting. You'll click on the link and it will ask you to enter in your first, last name, email, and district that you represent. And then once you do that, it will send you an email with the confirmation, and that email confirmation will have the information that you need in order to access town meeting. So some of you will have already seen what this looks like, of course, but this is what the registration page for town meeting will look like. So enter your first, last email address and pick which district you represent. It is really important that you register first, and I actually recommend that you register as soon as you get the email so that way you don't have to worry about doing it as you're joining town meeting. We have this set up so that everyone who registers in advance will get a reminder from Zoom an hour before town meeting starts, and that reminder will include the access information. So you won't have to go through your email and look for the original confirmation email. You will be getting it an hour before the meeting starts. One thing that I just want to touch base on now is that if you are a part of a household where more than one person is a town meeting rep, you will want to join from different devices. And the reason that you would want to join from a different device is because we want you to both be able to vote. And in order to vote, you have to be on two different devices. You cannot submit two votes from the same device, which is good because it means that nobody will be able to vote twice. But it does make it a little bit more difficult for those of you who have multiple family members who are town meeting reps. So I'll get into what our recommendations are for that setup in just a second. But this is generally sort of the step one for getting to town meeting. So step 2 is that you'll get the email confirmation, like we said. It's really important that you don't share this information. If you are communicating with another town meeting member and they are sort of struggling to figure out how to get to town meeting and they don't know where their link went, or they don't know how to register, our request would be that you connect them with me or with the town clerk's office. And the reason that we want to do that is because we really don't want to share this information and have it be accessible to people who are not town meeting members. You don't need to worry about the link being different for everyone who registers. It isn't necessarily different for everyone who registers, but it will just help us stay organized and make sure that the information is being provided to people who should have access to it, and not to people who don't. So we were saying this earlier, but registration is a really secure way of doing this. And that is one of the reasons why we can feel confident about voting using polls, knowing that only people who are town meeting members will have access to the meeting. In terms of joining the meeting, again, all of you made it here today, so that's exciting. So you will probably have done one of these things when you joined, but it is worth it, I think, just to go over it really quickly. You can join by downloading the Zoom desktop. So you don't have to do this. You can join from your web browser, which I think some of you probably have done today. But I recommend that you join from your Zoom desktop app because it is easier to use and will provide you with a little bit of a better experience. The desktop app also tends to have less glitches, and it just works sort of better. And generally, Zoom has really designed the software to be used in the desktop app. And so the joining from your browser is kind of what you would want to do if you're having trouble with the desktop app. So if you don't have, most of you probably already have the desktop app, but if you don't, if you just go to zoom.us/download and then click the first box that shows up, download under Zoom client for meetings, that will start the process for how to download Zoom. Again, you don't have to do this, but it is my recommendation that you do because it will provide a little bit of a better experience for you. If you are joining from your Zoom, from a phone or tablet, you actually do have to download the iPhone or Android app. You can do that by going to the App Store on whichever smartphone or tablet device you're using. And clicking the download or install buttons there. On the picture with the iPhone, I actually took it on my iPhone and I already have Zoom downloaded, which is why it says update. But if you did not have it downloaded, it would say install. So once you have done that, you can go to your email confirmation, and you in the email it will say there will be a link that says click here to join, and then under that it says passcode 582490 or whatever the passcode will be for actual town meeting. Once you click that link, it will open up a browser window, and you will, this is in Google Chrome, so it might look a little bit different depending on which browser you're using, but it will prompt you to open Zoom meetings if you have Zoom meetings installed. So you click the link, and then you would want to click open Zoom meetings, and that will open in your Zoom desktop app. Again, if you don't have Zoom installed, you can go to the middle of the screen where the big red arrow is and click download now, and that will lead you to the downloads page. You can also join by your web browser. So if you want to do that, you don't want to download the Zoom app, you can click on the link. It will bring you to the same exact page. And instead of clicking open Zoom meetings, you'll want to click cancel. And then you will want to click where the big red arrow is text that says having issues with Zoom client, join from your browser. You will want to click that, and that will enable you to join the meeting from your browser. The other option that you can do is open the Zoom desktop app and click join. And by doing that, you will just want to enter the meeting ID or the personal link that you get. So you can just copy, right click on that click here to join link and paste that here. Or in the bottom of the email, you will have the webinar ID listed. You can copy that and paste it here. Then you'll want to enter in your name and click join. It will prompt you to enter the password. And so you will want to do that. So that is sort of like a quick overview of how you'll join town meeting. So I know that we're cutting in a little bit to the Q&A time, so I just want to make sure that we have some time for that. So how to be recognized to speak at town meeting? You will be doing this by raising your hand. So as you recall, the hand raising button is located in the bottom middle of your screen, or if you're in the tablet, it's located in the top left, or excuse me, top right. I'm not going to go over this again because we've sort of already discussed this. But just remember that when you raise your hand, it will either put the gray box around it or it will turn it blue, and the text underneath will change from raise hand to lower hand. So I see some of you are testing your raised hands again, which is great. You can always make sure, double check to see if your hand is raised by looking at the participant box on the left side of the screen. Just to back up a little bit, in order to be recognized to speak at town meeting, you will need to raise your hand. So this functions exactly the same way as regular town meeting, where you would raise your hand from the audience in order for the moderator to recognize you to speak. So much in the same way that happens in regular town meeting, it will be happening here too. So when we get to an article and we get to the discussion period or the question period, you will want to raise your hand if you have a question to ask or a comment to make, and then the moderator will recognize you. Then the IT staff people will allow you to speak, at which point you will be prompted to unmute yourself, and then you can go ahead and ask your question and make your comment. So that is really how the being recognized to speak will work at town meeting. So we're going to be doing that all through the raised hand. So voting at town meeting, we sort of have gone over this already, so I'm not going to spend too much time doing this. As you recall, we'll be using Zoom polls for final motions on articles and raised hand for all other votes, such as votes on amendments and non-final motions like moving the question. So the other thing I think that is, I'm sort of backtracking a little bit, so apologies about that. The way in which I know someone asked earlier how we were going to require a second. So I'm remembering Joseph asked, some items require someone to second it. How will someone second a motion when audio is muted and chat is disabled? So the way that we're going to do that is that you will second the motion by raising your hand. So it's going to be in the same way that you would sort of say second if you were sort of in actual town meeting, or raise your hand in order to be recognized to speak. You will say, if someone wants to second a motion, all they will need to do is raise their hand. The town moderator will say, we have a second, and then we'll move on. So of course, if nobody raises their hand, then that means that nobody's seconding the motion. But that is how the seconding will work. David, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think what we'll do is anybody who raises their hand to second a motion, we'll take the first one that turns up, and then we can lower all hands.
Exactly.
So that if somebody is raising their hand to speak immediately upon somebody else having made a motion, you need to understand that hand going up too early might end up being lowered, because we'll be taking hands just for seconding. Now, the other thing is, with respect to motions, if somebody wants to make a motion on something, you can do it by raising your hand. And there's going to be a little bit of trial and error on this, folks, and we ask everybody's patience, because I can see somebody being recognized to speak, making a motion, then we call for a second, but do we end up wiping out all the people who were waiting to speak on the matter? We've got to be careful about that.
Yeah.
We might have to think about a workaround on that. Another point, while I think of it, we're asking folks, if you know you're going to have a motion, if you know in advance that you're going to have a motion on one of the several articles that we're taking up, please submit it in writing so that we have it in advance, and put your name on it. We'll have to accept that as the equivalent of a signature for these purposes, so that we have that in advance of the meeting. We can be sure to fit you in, or at least if it's a motion that ought to be put up on the screen, we can put it on a slide. Sometimes that's very important. So I ask that any motions that are being that people have in advance, that they submit them to the clerk's office by email, clerk@norwoodma.gov, and to me, moderator@norwoodma.gov. You're not prohibited from making motions on the floor or during the meeting itself, as we normally would, but it's helpful for us to have them in advance as much as possible. If you know you've got something that you want to propose to amend or add to or whatever. Thank you.
Exactly. Thanks, David. So like David was saying, when you, in order to second something, you would just raise your hand, and then I think I'm going to move on to talking about voting with raised hands because it sort of is relevant to this conversation. So when we vote with raised hands, the way that this will work is that the moderator will say, everyone who's in favor of the motion, raise their hand. And so we'll wait for everyone to raise their hand who wants to vote yes. Then we'll record the yes votes, the total number of people who've raised their hand. We'll record the yes votes. And then we will lower all of everyone's hand at once. And that will sort of be narrating this as it happens. So we'll say, now we're going to lower all of the hands. And then once everyone's hand is lowered, we'll ask everyone who wants to vote no to raise their hand. And then those people will raise their hand. And then we'll record those votes, and then we'll lower all of those hands as well. So that is kind of like the way in which voting will happen. Of course, I think David brought up a really good point about what happens if somebody makes a motion. For example, let's say there are 10 people who've raised their hand. The fifth person moves the question, but the motion to move the question actually fails. So then we'll have to go back to having discussion on the question or on the article. And so what we have done in the past is that before we clear those hands when somebody's making a motion that will require us to lower all hands, we record who the hands are that have been raised prior to the motion happening. And then if the motion fails, we can return to those people who had their hand raised. So that's something that that I'll sort of nail down with the Norwood staff team who's working on me with this, but that's generally speaking how the hand votes will happen. I also, just before I forget, I see that Catherine has asked, when we are called on to speak, can people see us on video? So the only people who will have access to video are people who are panelists. So generally speaking, when you are called on to speak, you will be asked to unmute, but you will not be given the ability to turn on your video. So in some ways, this is great because you don't need to worry about what you look like. You can sort of show up however you look and then not have to worry about it. But we also understand that some people would prefer to have to see themselves when they're asking questions. Unfortunately, in previous town meetings, we have actually promoted everyone who wants to ask a question to being a panelist so that they can show their video. And it actually adds about 30 seconds of delay to every person who asks their question. So you can see that if we have 15 people asking a question, every time we promote somebody to panelist, it adds 30 seconds before they can actually ask their question. And that time really catches up with you. So in the interest of making sure that we can get everything accomplished in the days of town meeting that we have decided not to promote people to being panelists. Of course, if there's a proponent for an article who is giving a presentation or something like that, they will be, and they're also a town meeting member, they will be promoted to panelists so that they can give their presentation.
Yeah, I think of it this way: for those of you who have been dying to attend town meeting in your pajamas, this is your opportunity.
Exactly. This is a come as you are type of situation, so you no need to get dressed up for our benefit because we actually won't be able to see you. So in some ways, it's kind of luxurious. So that is kind of how the video will work. So if you are concerned about not having video, like if you don't have a webcam or something like that, unless you are planning to give a presentation at town meeting, which I think most of you probably aren't, then you don't need to worry about it. All you need to worry about is your audio. Okay, so I'm going to keep us going because we've already covered Zoom polls. So again, we'll use those for votes on final votes on articles, and you'll be able to see the percentage and number results once those are finished. So making a point of order, we discussed this already, and the moderator explained that points of order are actually very limited. So we're not expecting that you will use the Q&A very often, but in case you need to, then in case you need to post a point of order, this Q&A is where you would go to do that. All right. So keep going. All right. So during town meeting, if you are experiencing technical issues, what the best thing for you to do would be to call the community call center. And that number is here on the screen. It will also be on the presentation during town meeting, so you won't necessarily need to remember it because it will be on screen, but that is where you will want to go in order to get technical support. So instead of posting in the Q&A, if you are having trouble with audio or if you're not seeing the poll show up, what we would want for you to do is call this community call center number, and someone on the phone will be able to assist you with that. So that is how we will deal with tech support issues that come up during town meeting. After tonight, if you have questions about how to use Zoom, or if you need some sort of direct assistance, you can always reach out to me at cbrandt@mapc.org. My email and phone number were in the letter that the town mailed to you, with the training dates on it. So you don't need to remember this now. If you have a question after tonight, please feel free to send me an email or give me a call, and we can figure out how best to assist you. If you have accessibility needs, contact the town clerk's office, and that is clerk@norwoodma.gov. So just some tips about how to troubleshoot some tech problems on your own. And we've talked a lot about this before, but if you are having trouble with your screen freezing or your Zoom being very slow, it could be an issue with your internet bandwidth. And so that becomes an issue when there are multiple people watching TV at the same time. So let's say you're on your Zoom, your spouse is on their Zoom, and you have a child who's watching Netflix on their computer or on the TV. All of those things are using the internet, and so that sucks up some of the bandwidth, and you might be experiencing some lagging or connectivity issues. So if that is happening to you, what our recommendation is that you try to limit the number of people who are using your internet connection during town meeting. You also can move closer to your internet router so that you're less far away, and so that you have a more easier time. Your computer has an easier time of accessing the wireless. And then if you have the ability to connect your computer to your to an Ethernet port, then we recommend doing that. And you can usually do that by connecting your computer directly to your internet router.
Question on that.
Please.
If somebody's phone is on Wi-Fi,
Yeah.
is that also using up some of the bandwidth?
Yes, if someone's phone is on Wi-Fi, it is also using up some of the bandwidth, but in my experience, phones don't use nearly as much bandwidth as computers do, or as TVs that are connected to Wi-Fi do. So if you have like a TV that is like, has an Apple TV enabled in it, or like a Roku or something like that, some streaming service, and Amazon Fire that's enabled, and someone in your house is watching Netflix or streaming something live, then that really tends to suck up a lot of bandwidth. But if your kid is just on their phone and they're watching like a YouTube video or something, that typically doesn't suck up that much bandwidth compared to computers. So that shouldn't be as much of a problem. But if you are experiencing that, that is just one thing to think about, that you might need to limit the number of devices, including phones, that are accessing the internet.
Thank you.
So if you can't hear again, first place to go is the audio settings function at the bottom of your screen. You can check your computer volume. If you're using headphones or something that have their own built-in speaker control, make sure that that speaker control is on. I have had headphones in the past where you can mute the headphones. So my audio is on, and I'm not muted on Zoom, but my headphone microphone is in fact muted. And so that has caused some problems for me in the past. And then, of course, if others can't see you or can't hear you, make sure that you're not muted, and so forth. And of course, if you're having these problems, you can always call the tech support line. So I see John has asked, town meeting is at 6:30 p.m. When will it end? I believe that if you can I actually will just, I won't speak for you, David. So if you want to do that.
When will it end? That's the big question. As you know, our rules don't allow us to go beyond 10:30 at night unless, in the moderator's opinion, we can finish the rest of the warrant with a reasonable extension. So it's a little bit unpredictable. We have several matters that could have a fair amount of debate. If we don't finish, we will adjourn to the following Monday. And Christian, am I correct? That requires a whole new Zoom meeting to be
Yes.
scheduled, and notice will have to be given to everybody because each
Yes.
meeting has its own scheduling codes and so forth.
Yeah.
So will we finish? We don't know, but we'll do our best, but we'll also do our best to allow as full a discussion as we can have, which raises the question that, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I'm speaking, Christian. So the question that was asked about members of the public speaking.
Yeah.
The law that authorizes town meeting to be held virtually for a representative town meeting. This doesn't apply to open town meetings, but applies to towns like ours. The law has a provision that non-town meeting members who wish to speak shall submit, they must submit a request to participate to the town clerk not later than 48 hours in advance of the meeting. And then upon receipt of that request and verification of the person's status, normally as a voter, but there are others who are non-voters who have an interest in the matter, property owners and so forth, the clerk will provide instructions for the person to participate. So non-town meeting members can participate, but only if they register 48 hours in advance.
Yep. And of course, like we mentioned earlier, town meeting will be streamed on Norwood Community Media, so people will be able to watch both on Norwood Community Media's website and also on the cable channel on their TVs. So I also see that Joseph has asked, will the numbers for a quorum change with a virtual town meeting?
The answer to that is that I understand the selectmen will take up at their meeting next Tuesday, the question of whether to vote to change the quorum for this meeting. And I had recommended that they at least consider that, and it ultimately requires my consent that they vote for it. For this reason, under the law that created virtual town meetings, the first thing that we do once we call the meeting to order is to take a vote whether to have the virtual town meeting. That means that if a majority of the town meeting members did not want to have a virtual meeting, then we would not hold it. And we would, our warrant calls for adjourning to the following Monday at the high school, if we had to meet in person. And I suggested to the selectmen that if that happened, I don't think that's likely to happen, but we have to deal with the possibility that could happen, because the alternative would be we'd have to dissolve the meeting and call a whole new meeting under a new warrant if the body voted not to go forward remotely and we didn't have a backup plan. But if we had to meet physically, I suspect that with conditions being what they are, we may not get as many people attending as we normally would. And so I recommended that the selectmen consider a reduction of the quorum. If we meet virtually, it's not likely we're going to need that. If we had to meet physically, it's a real possibility that we need it. So there may be a change in the quorum, but our hope is, and the experience of other towns that have done this, is that they have no difficulty reaching their normal quorum requirement. In fact, they sometimes get better attendance than in person.
Yep. All right, so I think we just have some helpful tips left. We've sort of reviewed most of these, but if you are looking for individual assistance specifically with using Zoom, you can always reach out to me by email. And again, my contact information was on the letter that you received from the clerk's office. Another thing to do is just to make sure that your desktop client and your tablet or smartphone app are up to date. So that way you sort of don't run into any problems. But since you're joining me today, I think that should be fine because none of you have seem to have any problems, which is great. And again, you are welcome to attend just one or all of the trainings. There is no limit to the number of trainings that you can attend. So if you feel like you need to go to another training so that you can just sort of like make sure that you really have the Zoom platform down, please absolutely feel free to do that. Those trainings are listed in an email that you should have received from the town clerk's office. And so you can go to that email if you need to re-register or register for another training. And of course, if you are having trouble using that email or anything like that, you can always get in touch with me, or you can email the clerk's office directly, and we can assist you. So, questions. I know that we've already asked a bunch of questions, but since we are now at the tail end of our training, we have about 2 minutes left before 6:30. But I am happy to stick around and answer some questions with people who need them. But otherwise, if you feel like you don't have any questions and you're all set, then you are welcome to hop off for the night. And if you realize later you have questions, you can always get in touch with me by email. So, great, thank you, David. I appreciate it. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or post it in the chat. If you raise your hand, I will unmute you, and then we can discuss that way. Awesome. I see. So, Thomas, you asked in the Q&A, how do I see the complete attendees list? So that's a really great question, and unfortunately, that is one limitation of Zoom that does not mirror what actual town meeting is like. So at actual town meeting, you obviously can look around the room and see everyone who's there. At Zoom town meeting, you will only be able to see the participants who are on the screen. So right now there's 25, and I just scrolled down on my participants list. So now you can see, in fact, you can see, Thomas, that you are listed at the very bottom, which is why if I scroll up, then we can't see you. If I scroll down, we can see you. At town meeting, you are only going to be able to see the participants who are in the top, 20, I think is how many people there are on this list. And without hands being raised, Zoom just organizes the list alphabetically. Once hands are raised, it does it by whoever raises their hand first. So unfortunately, there's not a way to see all at once how many people are in attendance at town meeting. You will be able to see at the top, there's no way to see all participants listed at once. At the top, you should be able to see how many people are in attendance by the number in parentheses next to the attendee's name. So if you are sort of wondering, if you've reached a quorum, for example, you'll be able to tell how many people are in attendance, how many town meeting members are in attendance by looking at the number in parentheses next to the name. All right, so Mr. Bergeron, I see that you have your hand raised.
Yeah, ask the question.
Yeah, I view an PC, but I need to use the iPhone for a microphone. The sign that appears to sign me in twice. Is that a problem?
You are using your phone's microphone instead of your computer, correct? Is that what you?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
It does sign you in twice. So let me think to myself. It is not the greatest situation in the world, because that does list you twice in town meeting. So I think what my recommendation would be is that you join from whichever device has the microphone. So if your computer doesn't have a microphone, then I would suggest that you join from your phone. The exception to this is that if you don't normally have any questions at town meeting, then it doesn't, and you're not anticipating that you're going to ask any, then you can join from the computer, the device that doesn't have the microphone. But if you want to be able to speak or ask a question or make a comment, then I would suggest that you join from the device that has the microphone. And the reason that I would suggest that is just because otherwise there's two of you, which means that you will have the ability to vote twice, once on the computer and once on your phone. And so in the interest of just keep making sure that everybody only has one option to vote, we want to limit people to one device, if that makes sense. And I can also sort of touch base with you.
We're unable to hear you, David.
Christian.
Christian.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Well, I wasn't able to hear you, Christian. I mean,
okay.
the last few sentences, the last few remarks that you made.
Okay, so what I was saying is that our preference would be that you join from whichever device has the microphone, if you are interested in speaking at town meeting. If you don't plan to speak at town meeting, then you can join from the computer without the microphone, and that should be fine. But if you join from two devices, it gives you access to voting twice. And just in the interest of sort of conformity with everything, we want people to only join from one device.
Well, we don't want that to happen, do we? All right, thank you very much.
You will have an outsized influence, that's for sure.
Well, don't tempt me. Thank you very much.
So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think that everybody should be getting the warrant notice with the text of all the articles. So you won't necessarily need to rely on the screen to see some of those articles, although of course the screen will be where you would see amendments or motions that come up during town meeting. So I would recommend that you still try to join from the device that has the microphone, so that you can still see the screen.
Yeah, one thing on that, we will try as much as possible to post the motions that are being made by the different proponents, so that we have them on the screen as much as we can do that. Or also, we're looking at whether we can get copies of the motions out to the members in advance. There's still some work to be done, but we're doing everything we can to make this as easy as possible for people.
Great. So I'm happy to stick around if anyone has any other questions. And John Collins, if you want to stick around towards the end, I'm happy to connect with you directly about your audio. I see, Donna, that you have a question. So
Yes, after what you said to Michael, I'm wondering, what about people who just want to watch the meeting like they usually do on TV? Maybe Michael could have it on his computer as watching it and participate on his phone.
that is a great suggestion. So I actually really appreciate that, because I did not think of that, but that is actually a really great suggestion. If you are concerned, because the phone is so small, it might be difficult to actually read the presentation. But I think Donna's suggestion is actually a great idea. If you join from your phone so that you can have access to voting and making a point of order, you can join from your phone and then watch on Norwood Cable, Norwood Community Media, where you'll be able to see the presentation on your screen. And that will obviously be bigger than your phone. So that's actually a really great suggestion. So I appreciate that. Thanks, Donna. All right. So if anyone else has any other questions, please feel free to stick around and ask them. I'll stay on for a little bit. But I am going to, since we are reaching the end, I'm actually just going to ask John, I'm going to ask you to unmute and see if you can speak. So I'm not going to speak because Okay, I just muted you again, John. So if you were speaking, we were not able to hear you. So what I'm going to suggest is that you, if you would be willing to send me an email, that way, or give me a call tomorrow. So again, my contact information is on the phone, or on the letter that you received from the town, and my email is on the email that you received from the town. So if you shoot me an email, we can connect over the phone so we can figure out what might be happening with your audio and get you all set up for town meeting. Because I think it seems like the your microphone is not necessarily connecting to Zoom. So we can figure that out tomorrow or whenever is sort of convenient for you. And then again, you can come to another training if you need. All right, so we are 7 minutes over. So if you don't have any questions, feel free to head out, and then I'll hang around for a little bit. I'll leave this open for a couple minutes if folks have questions, and then I will end the meeting. But I appreciate everyone coming. Thanks so much.
Thank you all. Thanks very much for attending. Night, everybody.